Hey there, IT 145 students. So in this recording, we're going to take a look at array lists in Java. So last time we talked about arrays and how they could be used to represent multiple values. So I'm going to go back to the example that we had before. So remember, we might have the scores for a basketball game. And previously, before arrays, before array lists, you might have used separate variables to represent these values. And I mentioned in that recording that, well, what if you need to have a score for overtime? Well, you would have to declare that variable. And then if they never went into overtime, you'd have a variable that would potentially never, ever be used. So then we talked about, well, we could create an array that represents those scores. So we've got our array of scores here. And you can see here that I declared it with a size of 4. So that means I'd have values for 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? But I don't have a score for overtime. So while I kind of mentioned, that this is a problem, we didn't really come up with a good solution to it for using arrays. So we want to see how we could potentially improve this. So if we want to keep track of somebody's scores, we potentially use an array list to represent this information rather than an array. So keep in mind, using an array, we are restricted to specifying how many values it has. So, we don't know how many overtimes there are going to be. It could be, 5, there could be 1 overtime, there could be double overtime. So if there are multiple overtimes, we don't know how many they're going to be. So we can't really specify what that size is going to be when we declare it. So the array list is going to help us by being a little bit more flexible with adding scores to it. So let's take a look at the array list. So in section 4.6, they give us the array list. I am going to use the word list here rather than when I talked about an array. An array is a data structure. It's kind of like a list. However, this is a list, so it's in its name. Like the array, we refer to each element in it as an element. And then to declare an array list, this is a little bit newer syntax for you. We go array list, the data type, the name of the list equals new array list. And again, we have to specify the data type, and you can see that we can shortcut that now in newer versions of Java. Keep in mind that an array list only works with objects. So I can only use objects. I can't use primitive types here. So let's go ahead and come back over here. So we've got array list of type integer, and we'll say it's scores equals new array list. And we'll need to do an import. There it is. And I've got a duplicate, so we'll just comment this out right there. And so here is our declaration. Again, I mentioned earlier, so they've got in the angled brackets the data type. You only need to have it on the left side. You can get rid of it on the right side, but you do need to include the empty angle brackets. Java compiler will determine what the type is supposed to be. If I try to declare this with a primitive type, I'm going to get a compiler error because I can only use reference types. We can only use an object. So now that we've got our array list declared, we can see in the example here that they are adding values to the array list by calling an add method. They get a value from the array list by using a get method. So I don't necessarily need to use the indexing like we did back in the array. So we could come in here, we could do scores.add. So let's say 5, scores.add 3, scores.add, let's say 0 in the third quarter, scores.add 5 points. And then what if we had overtime? We could just come in here and go add no points in the first overtime. Scores.add 5 points in the second overtime. So this would be quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, and then potentially this is OT1. This is overtime 2. So I don't have to worry about having a variable declared, or I don't have to worry about the size, because the advantage about using in a list is it will expand as needed. So as I add more values, its size increases. And then if I want to get a value, I can do a get method, and note that it is specifying a particular index. So if I say get position 0, in fact, we'll just go ahead and print that out. So we'll go ahead and print out score 0. Let's see here. What do we have anything commented in here? Let's go ahead and comment this out. And we'll just comment all of this out. So we'll print out scores 0. And we'll print out the last one. So let's see here. So it should actually be 5. It's going to be just like an array we access by an index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is position 5. So let's go ahead and run that. And it doesn't like something somewhere. I must have commented out a curly closer. Yep, that guy right there. And so position 0 is a 5. And the last position is also 5. So let's change this so that way we see that it's different values. So we'll say that they scored 15 points in overtime 2. They won the game for the team. So we've got a 5 and a 15. Great. What if we try to access an index that does not exist? So for instance, -1. And we get an index out of bounds exception, just like with the array. If you try to access something that's not in the indices that are available, you're going to get a runtime exception. So we want to avoid that. So again, the array list, we've seen the add method, we've seen the get method. If I want to update a position, so for instance, let's say that we mistakenly gave them 3 points for quarter 2, but it was actually 13 points that they were supposed to get. So this would have started out with a 3. It should, let's do this. We'll make it, since we're doing a get call on position 0. We'll say that they scored 15 points here. And mistakenly we put 15, but they actually only scored 5. Oops. They only scored 5 points. So initially we put in a 15, but we're like, oops, we need to update that. So we give it the index and the value. So now this will have started with 15, but then it's going to be a 5 at the end. So we run this. This would have put a 15 in, but this would have updated it to a 5. A very important property is the size, so we can get how many are in there. That's going to be useful for us to loop through the array list. So they've got some examples here. What I want to point out is they're going to iterate through the list. So again, you can use a for I loop, just like they do here, or you can also use the for each loop that is been given to you, and it's actually defined in section 4.7. So for int I equals 0. Again, we can do the exact same thing just like an array. Scores dot, remember it's a size attribute here. And we can print them all out. So we'll comment out getting those two right there, and we'll print them all out. So we should have, remember this starts as a 15, but we're going to change it to a 5. So we should get 5, 3, 0, 5, 0, 15. Cross your fingers. And there it is. Fantastic. We're all good there. And again, we can use the for each syntax as well. Int value in scores. And we should probably actually call it score, not value, right? And so we'll comment out the for I loop and we'll run it and we get the exact same values again. So great, fantastic. Um, again, they point out here they're going to calculate sums and averages. We could do the exact same thing. It's the exact same algorithm. So if I wanted to accumulate what my sum was, we start at 0 and we accumulate the score. And that should be sum. Great. What do we score? So remember, we're not going to have the 15 in there. We're going to update that. So 3, 8, 23. We have 28 points. Cross your fingers. Oops, I didn't do that right. 3, 8, 23. Yeah, it should be 28. There it is. We do get that 28. So again, we can loop through and just like with the array, we can process it just like this. Oh, by the way, one thing that's a little bit different about array lists than than arrays is I can actually call the print method and print this out. So when I print out scores, I'm going to get out what the list contains. If I had it as an array, so we'll declare an array. So if I try to declare the array and then print out the array, you'll see that we don't get the values printed out. We get some kind of potential gibberish. And what we're actually getting is this is the internal memory address that Java is using for this variable. So I can't print out all of the array values nicely, but Java did provide a nice interface to print out all of the list values. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this recording. So again, we've got the idea of an array list, which lets us represent values like an array. However, we have the advantage that we can add values to it. The list gets bigger as we add to it. And I'm not relegated to a specific size like we were with an array. All right, I will talk to you next time.